Hey everybody, welcome back. We're diving deep today into something I think we can all relate to. You know, that feeling of hitting a wall, coming up empty, like you've been working all night but caught absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
But what if those empty nets? What if they're actually an invitation, like an invitation to something deeper? That's what we're going to be looking at today.
Right? Yeah.
And it's all inspired by, that story about Jesus and the miraculous catch of fish.
Oh, yeah. It's a familiar story to a lot of people, but what I think is so interesting is how this simple event, this story from the Gospel of Luke, how it speaks to like a universal human experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And to guide us on our deep dive today, we've got a sermon called Go Deep that really unpacks this story.
Okay.
And we've also got the passage from Psalm 90, adds another layer.
Nice.
So our mission today, what we're hoping to figure out is what does going deep actually mean?
Right.
Is it just about blind faith
Mm-hmm.
or, you know, pushing harder or there's something more to it?
Yeah.
And how can we apply this even if we don't, consider ourselves religious or whatever?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Okay, so picture this. It's dawn on the lake of Gennesaret.
Right.
Simon Peter and his fellow fishermen, they've been out all night.
Oh.
And their nets are empty, they're exhausted, and probably feeling pretty discouraged. Can you almost feel that weight, that disappointment?
Absolutely. And for these fishermen, this wasn't just a hobby, right? This was their livelihood. Empty nets meant an empty table. The sermon actually compares it to the pastor's own all-nighter experience in college,
Yeah.
like struggling with writer's block. It's that universal feeling,
Yeah.
of hitting a wall, no matter what your work
That's
is.
so true. We've all had those moments, right, where you pour your heart into something and it feels like you're getting nowhere. But then Jesus walks onto the scene, a rabbi, a teacher, not a fisherman.
Right.
And he starts offering advice. I find it interesting that the sermon points out that Jesus isn't exactly a fishing expert.
Yes. It makes you think, right, about expertise. How often do we cling to our own experience and resist guidance, even when we're clearly stuck?
That's a really good point. I know I've been there, thinking, I know best. But sometimes the best thing we could do is let go of control and be open to something new. Where do you find that resistance to letting go shows up in your own life?
That's a great question to consider. And in the story, even though Simon Peter is skeptical, he ultimately decides to trust Jesus, right? He follows his instructions to put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch.
And what happens next? Well, let's just say they needed a bigger boat. It's a pretty dramatic turning point in the story. But the sermon suggests that this miraculous catch, it's about more than just fish, right?
Exactly. It's a metaphor. It's about going deeper in our faith and in our lives. It's about stepping out of our comfort zones and embracing the unknown, even when it feels risky.
The sermon talks about deep water as a metaphor for the chaotic parts of life, the uncertain parts. Those times when we feel out of control, like we're in over our heads. It's easy to stay in the shallows where it feels safe. But what if the real growth, the real catch, happens when we dare to go deeper?
That's a powerful thought. And the sermon's not shying away from the fact that the church itself needs to embrace this idea of going deep, too. They even compare it to the Protestant Reformation, saying church historians believe that we're in the middle of a major shift, a major change.
Wow. That's a pretty big statement. But it makes sense, right? The world is changing so rapidly, and it feels like faith institutions need to adapt too. Like they need to cast their nets into the deep water of the modern world, like the sermon says.
Right, and that's where it gets even more interesting because this deep dive, this idea of going deep, it isn't just about, you know, individual faith or even just organized religion. It's about a much bigger principle of growth and transformation that applies to all of us. One thing the sermon points out is that the Greek word for catch in this passage, it's not about hunting or capturing, it's actually about rescuing people from peril.
Hmm.
So maybe this story is like it's prompting us to think about how we view our own missions in life, you know?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at it. Instead of focusing on what we're getting,
Mm.
like, fish or success or whatever, maybe it's more about how we can serve others,
Right.
how we can use what we've got, our talents and experiences to make a positive impact.
Exactly. It's about seeing our work, our relationships, our everyday actions through this lens of service, of rescue. Maybe that's what it means to cast our nets into the deep water, being open to the ways that we can help, to reach out to those who are struggling and offer a lifeline.
I really like that. It makes me think about that line from Psalm 90, establish the work of our hands.
Yeah.
It feels like a reminder that we're not alone in our efforts, that there's something bigger supporting us, guiding us. But the sermon also talks about how we shouldn't, compartmentalize faith.
Yes. It's easy to fall into that trap, making faith a Sunday-only thing, keeping it separate from our daily lives.
Right.
But this story, it challenges us to integrate our beliefs into everything we do. Let our deep water faith inform our work, our relationships, our choices.
It makes me wonder, maybe that disconnect is part of why so many people feel disillusioned with organized religion.
All right.
Like, if it doesn't feel relevant to their daily struggles and joys, then what's the point?
That's a really insightful observation. And I think the sermon is trying to bridge that gap by giving us a practical way to connect faith with our everyday experiences. They encourage us to ask ourselves this simple but really powerful question: how is God saving your life right now?
Or, if that language doesn't resonate, they offer an alternative. What is saving your life right now? I love that. It's a question that anyone can ask.
Exactly. It invites us to take a deeper look at the things that give us strength, that give us meaning, purpose, the things that help us navigate the challenges, the difficulties of life.
And it's not always about, grand gestures or these big dramatic interventions. Sometimes it's the small things. A kind word from a friend, a moment of beauty in nature, a sudden insight that helps us shift our perspective.
It's about recognizing the lifelines that are all around us, both seen and unseen, the things that help us stay afloat when we feel like we're drowning in the deep water, and sometimes realizing that we have the power to be that lifeline for someone else.
That's a powerful thought. And it brings us back to that idea of going deep, not just in our own lives, but in our connection to others. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, navigating the deep waters of life as best we can. And maybe that's the key takeaway here. It's not about having all the answers or achieving some perfect state of being or something.
That's right.
It's about embracing the journey with all of the uncertainties, the challenges. It's about trusting that even when we feel lost or overwhelmed, that there's a deeper current, guiding us towards something meaningful.
Yeah, that makes me think of, there's something in the sermon that they talk about the ripples on the surface.
Uh-huh.
We may not always see, the full impact of our actions, but every choice that we make, every, act of courage, every act of kindness,
Yeah.
it creates a ripple that kind of extends outward. And it touches the lives of other people in ways that we may never even, fully comprehend.
Oh, I like that. That makes me think about the butterfly effect.
Yeah.
How even the smallest actions can have a huge impact on the world around us. So if we're constantly trying to, go deep in our lives and our faith and our connection to others, who knows what kind of ripples we might create.
That's the exciting part, isn't it? It's like an invitation to step into the unknown, to embrace the mystery of it all, and to trust that even in chaos and uncertainty, there's a deeper purpose, unfolding.
And maybe that's the ultimate catch, not like a tangible reward or outcome, but a deeper understanding of ourselves and our place in the grand scheme of things.
Maybe it's about discovering that the deep water isn't something to be afraid of, but it's an invitation to dive in and explore and to come out, transformed by that experience.
That's a beautiful thought.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us today on this deep dive into, the idea of going deep. We've covered a lot, from the story of the miraculous catch of fish to the challenges and opportunities of living a more integrated life, a more purpose-driven life.
Remember, the journey doesn't end here. Keep exploring. Keep asking those tough questions. Keep casting your nets wide. You never know what you might find.
And who knows what ripples you might create along the way. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.